you to take the bread and to remember that God makes this new agreement, this new covenant of grace and mercy, of redemption. And when you participate in the cup, also to welcome that as it goes down, to welcome that into your life, this grace and hope and new life that comes through him. These are the gifts of God, therefore the people of God. Let us keep the feast. In the year 536, an Irish abbot by the name of Columba set sail for Scotland, actually for the Hebridean Islands on the west coast of Scotland. He landed on a small island of Kintyre near Southend, and then continued on until he landed in a place and settled in a place called Iona. The Isle of Iona captured Columba's imagination, and if you've been there, you will understand why. The light on Iona bends in hues of magenta and in coral. The landscape shimmers in shades of green and just hints of mint. The whole experience of being there for Columba was so profound that it was for him sacred. And in fact, he said of that spot on the earth that the scrim between heaven and earth, a boundary, was gossamer thin. It is such an important idea. It's a valuable idea that there are people and places and experiences in this world where the boundary between heaven is so thin as to be translucent. That means that light shines through, and yet it's diffused in a way that you cannot see the object behind the scrim. And that's what happened to Columba on Iona. He said that the scrim was gossamer thin. Most of us know what that's like. At some point in our lives, we have some experience like that. We don't talk about it easily, but we know it. A group of us from this congregation traveled recently to the Holy Land. We went up into the Galilee and saw all the places where the one whose birth we celebrate this evening did his miracles. And then we went down into Jerusalem, and we stood up on the Mount of Olives looking down at the bustling city of Jerusalem. We went down the Palm Sunday Road, and as we did, we looked in front of us, and there was an enormous platform, thousands of yards each way, an enormous place. The Jews worship at the Western Wall on the side of it and call it the Temple Mount. The Muslims also worship there. There's Al-Aqsa Mosque as well as the Dome of the Rock, this beautiful golden dome. But then in front of it is a small grove of olive trees, and it's called the Garden of Gethsemane. And our group went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And there we held a worship service. Catherine presided over a communion service, and she broke the bread and poured the cup and called us forward to receive these elements, which are for us the very presence of God. And as she did, the Adhan, which is the Muslim call to prayer, rung out from Al-Aqsa Mosque and then from many mosques all over East Jerusalem. They rung out also. And it was almost as if a sacred hush fell over Jerusalem as Jews from around the world worshiped and prayed for God to enter their lives and to be with them at the Western Wall. And then just above it, Muslims prayed very much the same thing. And on the other side, Christians, all in close proximity, all approaching God as we understand God, and God asking God to come to us, to be with us, and for the boundary to be thin. That day in Jerusalem, the scrim between heaven and earth was gossamer thin. The translucent light shined on our group and shined over the whole city. This is largely what the Christmas story is about. That light broke through and spoke to a young woman named Mary and said, I have good news of great joy for all the people. You will bear a son who will redeem the people. And this is good news. And yet to Mary, it couldn't have felt like good news. She had to explain to Joseph and to her friends, and then she gave birth to this child in the most difficult of circumstances. So tonight, while light broke in, would have seemed still quite dark to Mary. More light broke in to shepherds who were out watching over their flocks by night. There were heavenly hosts in the sky announcing this Savior's birth, this one who was going to restore the fortunes of Israel, was going to throw off the Romans and make Israel great again. And so these shepherds went with haste to Bethlehem, and there they found a baby adorned not in royal symbols, but in swaddling clothes, in a manger of all these places. And these shepherds had to wonder, can this be the light of God born into our world? Light broke through again in a natal star. announcing to wise men in the east that this Savior had been born, that God had come to be with us. And so they went to Jerusalem and they approached the king at that time, a very violent man named Herod. And they said, "Where is this newborn king? We've seen his star. God, the light has told us of him." And he said, "We would very much like to know where this king is." And so they went and they brought their gifts. They found him and they laid their gifts. But they went home another way because they knew that Herod preferred the darkness to the light. Even Joseph, who most likely had a difficult time believing it all, had a light break in. That thin scrim between heaven and earth entered his consciousness in a dream and told him that Herod had plans for this newborn king and for his baby, and he needed to take him and run and to preserve Jesus' life. And so he did, because Herod had plans for this newborn king. And it was into that kind of world, a world of military occupation and of violence and of doubt, that the light of the world, Jesus Christ, was born.
Hope was born on Christmas. In this Christ child, the hope of all creation opened its eyes to a new reality. Through this Christ child, God leaned down into our mess. Through this child, God determined that God wouldn't exist without latching God's very self onto us. And so this hope is placed into our arms and asks for our care. For hope cannot exist in abstraction alone, but necessitates action. Hope is made in the millions of minuscule moments that offer themselves to us. Hope is made when we allow the current of God's love to flow through our thoughts, words, and deeds. Hope is made when we determine to latch ourselves onto the love of God. And so we light the candle of hope.
This awakened hope leads us to long for peace. We long for peace in a world of uncertainty. We long for peace that calms the troubled heart. We long for a peace that moves toward tension, a peace that passes understanding. In God's own longing and intention for us to know this kind of peace, God comes to us not as one with great status or great privilege, but as the Prince of Peace, reminding us that this peace is not reserved for a particular place or a particular people or even a particular season. Rather, this peace, the peace of Christ, is for all people, for all places, for all seasons. And so tonight, we light the candle of peace.
Show God's love aright. She bore to all a Savior, when half spent was the night.
The light of the world is the joy of all people. Joy is our response to the great gift of God's presence in our midst. Joy celebrates all that is good and life-giving and true, even as it acknowledges the reality of hardship and pain. Our joy leans into the trust that the God who created all things is Emmanuel, God with us in all things. And so tonight we light the candle of joy.
This flower whose fragrance tender with sweetness fills the air, dispels with glorious splendor the darkness everywhere. True man, yet very God. From sin and death he saves us and lightens every load.
On the night Christ was born, love came into this world with meekness and humility. And while this love came to us in the gentlest form, this love has the power to overcome hate and darkness. This love boldly proclaims that all are welcome in God's kingdom. And because of God's love for us, we strive to model this love in our world. Tonight, we gather, echoing the saints before us, eager to grasp just how high, wide, long, and deep the love of Christ is, and to know we can rest in God's unfailing love for us all. And so, we light the candle of love.
Peace, love, joy, the light of Christ born into the world on this night. The Gospel of John describes it this way. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning. All things came into being through him, and what came into being through him was life. And that life was the light of all people. Light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Will you please stand to receive the light? And so now may the light of Christ and all it brings, hope, peace, love, joy, be born into your life tonight and forever. Go in peace.